These are the 10 things you need to know before the final push towards the NBA playoffs. First, starting out with just how much better Golden State will be now that they have Jimmy Butler. After an incredibly hot start to the season, the Warriors plummeted as teams were loading up on Steph Curry, and they didn't have enough secondary playmaking or shot creation. So they make the big splash for Jimmy Butler, and the first 4 games of his tenure have looked pretty solid, going 3-1 in that time. But is it enough to make them title contenders again? Personally, I wouldn't be counting out a healthy Steph Curry or Jimmy Butler heading into a playoff series, and I've actually really liked what we've seen from Jimmy Butler's fit on this team so far. He gives them a lot of what they've been missing, such as rim pressure, getting to the free throw line, another ball handler, someone to play make in the middle of the floor, and a more than capable secondary scoring option who can keep the team afloat in the non-Steph Curry minutes. Those minutes without Steph on the floor have always been an issue for the Warriors over their dynasty years, but now they have a clear focus on what to do in those minutes. Before the Jimmy trade, it was a lot of Brandon Podziemski dribbling the air out of the basketball, lacking any real kind of offensive identity. But now with Jimmy Butler, expect this to be Jimmy Bucket's time, going to work in isolation sets where he's more than capable of keeping the scoreboard ticking over while giving you maximum effort on defense too. However, it is still too early to see just how good this team really is, but it's definitely a question I'll be keeping in my mind for the rest of this regular season. The second thing you need to know for the rest of the NBA season is whether or not the Denver Nuggets are actually the best team in the West. The Nuggets have now won 8 straight games, and after an incredibly slow start to the season, Jamal Murray is now back playing his absolute best basketball, capped off by a 55-point explosion against the Blazers. Nikola Jokic is still the most unstoppable force in the game, and with MPJ and Aaron Gordon also playing at their best too, are they the best team in the West once again? Well, after this 8-game winning streak, it's starting to look that way, because when I look at the top of the East, I see a lot of unexperienced young teams such as OKC, Memphis, and Houston, and the latter two I don't have much confidence or trust in to go the distance in the playoffs, but with Denver, I have the trust in them. They've got the championship experience along with the talent needed to get the job done, especially when the lights are the brightest, and don't forget they've got the best player in the world on their side. Nikola Jokic has been putting up these incredible numbers this season, and I just don't know how he's not going to win the 4th MVP this year. And for those reasons, I trust the Nuggets the most, and I think we're going to know pretty quickly whether I'm right or not with just how good they play coming out of this All-Star break. The third thing you need to know for the rest of the NBA season is whether or not the Kyle Kuzma trade will end up being the right decision or not. When the Bucks pulled the pin on Chris Middleton, it wasn't necessarily surprising, but many were shocked with who they traded for. Kyle Kuzma hadn't exactly been having a great season with Washington, but since he joined Milwaukee, I'm starting to come around to the idea of the trade, especially after I've seen him on the court with the team. The Bucks have had a dilemma all season long that's been holding them back. When they play fast, their offense is amazing, but their defense suffers, and that's because of their age and just not being able to get up and down the court quick enough. So when they slow it down to lean into being a better defensive team, that offense goes out the window. So the team needed to find a way to play faster, leaning into the duo of Dame and Giannis, and the move for Kyle Kuzma absolutely accomplishes that goal. He's a 6'9" athletic wing who can get up and down the court in a blink of an eye, and if you look at his shooting splits with the Wizards, it's not a pretty sight, but you've got to remember that that's mainly because he was the first option, being guarded by the opponent's best defensive player, which are the reasons for his down shooting year. But since he's been with the Bucks, he's shown an ability to knock down his open shots, push the pace in transition, but most importantly, pull down big rebounds. The Bucks were at their best defensively when they were closing out possessions with the defensive rebounds. And Kyle Kuzma is going to give them that ability full-time in the starting lineup, as he can hopefully be the piece that will allow the Bucks to play quick while still being a good defensive team. But only time's going to tell whether or not they will miss that veteran experience that Middleton gave them once the postseason comes around. The fourth thing you need to know before the playoffs start is what the Lakers are going to do defensively. After pulling off the greatest heist in NBA history, the Lakers have set themselves up for the future. But what about the rest of this season? They had a trade in the works to bring in themselves a real center with Mark Williams, but the deal fell through, and now they lack that starting level big. Alex Lynn was recently picked up off the buyout market. However, he doesn't really help their cause either because he's not good enough to be a starter. Jackson Hayes was the starter in the game since the trade, but we haven't had a large enough sample size to see just how good or bad the Lakers are defensively, as they've only played 2 games against the Jazz, where they blew them out in the first game and then got smacked in the second game. But it's in that second game where they gave up 131 points, and that's not a good look, leaving me wondering just how bad is their defense really. Their issues aren't just at the big man spot either, as they also have very little point of attack defense with Doncic and Reeves in the backcourt. Despite having Luka and LeBron James on the same team, I still don't really believe in the Lakers as currently constructed to make it to the Western Conference Finals or further. But in the same light that they've been struggling to get stops themselves, with the potential small ball lineup they could run out there, I think teams are going to struggle just as much back the other way, because they will legitimately have a 5-out offense with Doncic, Reeves, James, Hachimura, and Dorian Finney-Smith. LeBron and Luka should be able to get into the paint at will, and Rui Hachimura, Finney-Smith, and Austin Reeves are all capable of attacking closeouts and knocking down their 3-point shots, meaning you're not able to really sag off these guys either. So coming out of the All-Star break, I am going to be closely monitoring this Lakers team to see whether or not they make any strides defensively, because they're going to need to if they want to make a deep run. The 5th thing you need to know before the playoffs start is whether or not the Spurs have one last push in them. Trading for De'Aaron Fox, just like the move for Doncic, was a trade for the future, but many, myself included, thought that this deal would see San Antonio play their first postseason action in the Victor Wembanyama era. However, since acquiring Fox, they haven't exactly been amazing, as defense has been a real issue for this team, along with the offense that's just looked clunky. They've been in a lot of close games since the trade, and in those close games, it's been a lack of execution down the stretch that's been concerning, but this isn't something we haven't seen before, as you've got to remember that these two haven't played with each other at all until this point. I believe that potentially getting some work together in the All-Star break to really get on the same page with one another could potentially steer them in the right direction, especially if they want to salvage what's left of this season. Currently, the Spurs are sitting as the 12th seed in the Western Conference, but they're only 2 games back of the 10th seeded Warriors, as the playoffs are still within reach. So it's going to be interesting to see if they have one last push left to make it to the postseason. The 6th thing you need to know before the playoffs start is how there's a decision needing to be made in Philadelphia. Everything that could have possibly gone wrong for the 76ers this season has. Embiid has missed so much time with injuries, and even when he's healthy, he doesn't look like his MVP self. Paul George has been absolutely horrendous, and even their standout rookie Jared McCain had a season-ending injury. After an embarrassing back-to-back where they dropped games to the Raptors and the Nets, I wonder whether or not the 76ers front office are going to pull the pin on the season. It doesn't make any sense further risking the health of Joel Embiid, especially considering the fact that he believes he's going to need another knee surgery in the off-season. So why not just shut him down now and let him have a solid 6 months to recover and potentially be ready for next season? Because even if you don't shut them down, the best case scenario is that they make it to the playoffs as an 8 seed, where they would then have to go up against the Cavs in round 1, which is a series that they have little to no chance of winning. So if they did pull the pin on the season, they would save themselves from suffering potentially more injuries, while giving Joel Embiid more time to rest and recover, and most importantly, they could potentially get a higher draft pick in a talented class. The decision to play out the season or call it quits is one that I'll be eagerly awaiting to see, but if I was in charge of making the call, I would have called it already by now. The 7th thing you need to know before the playoffs begin is whether or not the Thunder not making a deal at the deadline was the right call or not. The deadline came and went, and OKC didn't make a move for another scorer or shooter like many thought they would. Cam Johnson was flirted around and probably would have been a pretty good fit. However, the guy who would have had to been shipped in the other direction would have been Aaron Wiggins, who conveniently started playing amazing basketball right around this time. I think this is going to be a situation where if the Thunder are second round exits, we're going to look back at the deadline and wonder to ourselves, why didn't they make the trade? Despite the fact it made total sense in the moment because of how good Wiggins has been as of late, and the fact that they now have a $40 44-10 record at All-Star break. Their defense is historic, which will be massive in the postseason, but the only concern I have for OKC is what do they do when SGA's having an off night? Right now, your secondary scorers would be Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren, who both have the talent to do so, but I don't think they have the experience to give you that kind of production consistently in the postseason at such a young age. Both Williams and Holmgren struggled against the Mavericks last postseason, where they were both pretty inefficient in that series. But only time will tell whether or not their defense is just going to be good enough to make a deep run anyway, or if that lack of another offensive spark will hurt them. The 8th thing you need to know before the playoffs begin is whether or not Cleveland's addition of DeAndre Hunter will be enough to compete with the Celtics. Right now, the layout of the East is pretty simple, with Boston and Cleveland being the clear 2 best teams, with the Knicks, in my opinion, being good enough to challenge both teams. The Cavs, just like OKC, are a young team who have been incredibly good this season, but unlike the Thunder, the Cavs made a move at the deadline, bringing in Hunter from Atlanta to fill a hole within their team. For the last 3 or so seasons, the Cavs have been looking for a quality 3, and they've finally found one with Hunter, who was leading the 6th Man of the Year voting, averaging nearly 20 points per game off the bench. Hunter is a more than capable offensive contributor, and when you look at his defensive impact, he's not an elite defender by any means, but he is quite good at just staying in front of his opponent, which will be very handy in a series against the Celtics, where if Hunter could just slide his feet and stay in front of a Jason Tatum or a Jaylen Brown, that's all he's going to really have to do when you've got the twin towers of Allen and Mobley behind him. Before their move, the wing matchups with Boston were in the Celtics' favor, but now it's going to be interesting to see just how much of a difference that makes, and the Cavs are going to be playing the Celtics 3 days after the All-Star break ends, so that's a game I'll be watching eagerly. The 9th thing you need to know for the rest of the NBA season is if the Knicks can remain healthy, playing all the minutes they log every night. Knicks coach Tom Thibodeau is known for playing his players heavy minutes, and this season has been no different, as 3 of the Knicks starters rank in the top 15 for minutes per game, those being Mikal Bridges at 1, Josh Hart at 3, and OG Anunoby at 11, all playing over 35 minutes a night. The reason why this is concerning is pretty obvious, because more minutes on your legs makes it more likely that you're going to get injured, and beyond just that theory, we actually have proof of this in action, because in last year's playoffs, it felt like the entire team got injured in that series against Indiana, which led to them being eliminated. At full strength, as I mentioned earlier, I believe they're good enough to contend with the Celtics and Cavs, but considering the crazy minute load they've already endured throughout the season, and with that likely to just keep increasing as we get closer to the playoffs, I just don't know how this team's going to manage health when they need to be healthy the most. The 10th thing you need to know for the rest of the NBA season is who the Grizzlies' number 1 option will be. The Grizzlies are currently the 2 seed in the West, with the Nuggets breathing down their necks, and they've been doing this without Ja Morant being at 100%. It feels like whenever you're turning on a Grizzlies game, it's basically a flip of a coin on whether or not you're going to see Ja Morant playing. Ja hasn't been playing like himself this season, but that hasn't mattered because of how good Jaren Jackson Jr. has been, putting up 23 points per game this season, even making the All-Star team. Jaren Jackson Jr. has been the best player for the Grizz this season, and I first wonder, will Morant get back to 100% this season? And if he does, what will the team dynamic look like? The team has gotten comfortable playing with or without him, using Jackson Jr. as the number 1 option, and because of that, I wonder which version of the Grizzlies we're going to get in the playoffs. Not only that, I wonder whether or not the best possible version of this team would even be good enough to compete with OKC or Denver, who in my opinion both have them beat when it comes to talent. Their team construction is pretty deep, and their offensive system is very unique, but I don't necessarily believe that this team can make a deep playoff run if Jaren Jackson Jr. is their number 1 option. I believe Memphis needs the real Ja Morant to come back if they're going to have a chance to make a deep playoff run this season. I think the Nuggets would be a real struggle for the Grizzlies because of just how well Murray and Jokic have been playing as of late, as the duo just made NBA history for a crazy stat that makes them one of the rarest pairings we've seen in the history of this league. And if you want to hear more about that, you can watch this breakdown next.